Entrepreneurship to the Point is a platform to inform, equip, and inspire entrepreneurs during this very difficult period of COVID-19, and absolutely glad to be with all of you this afternoon. So please do follow us on our social media pages at E to the Point on Twitter. Also have a look at our website, www.ettp.co.za, and do sign up to our newsletter to be kept informed of sessions that are going to be coming up in future. And we certainly have a number of great conversations lined up during this time. I'd also like to encourage you to use the chat at the bottom of your screen. We've got a team of people who are manning the chat, so please do share your comments and do share your questions, and we will be sure to respond to them, and to also channel those questions to our guest this afternoon. So I would like to take the opportunity to welcome Yolisa Jafta, who is from the People's Fund. Yolisa is no stranger to Entrepreneurship to the Point. She's been on some of our prior sessions and knows us very well. The context for our discussion this afternoon with Yolisa, as we've had with other funders and solutions during this period of COVID-19, is to be able to bring some of these solutions to you and to speak about options that are available in the market. Access to funding is always a very important aspect for entrepreneurs, and it's no different during this critical period. So I'd like to take the opportunity to welcome Yolisa. Yolisa, welcome this afternoon, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Jessica.
So Yolisa's official title is the COO at the People's Fund. I've seen her being referred to as the drill sergeant on their website, and I'm not making this up.
That's my official title, actually.
So Yolisa, thanks for joining us. I think in looking at the People's Fund, and here again, just to read from your website, you guys are an asset-based crowdfunding platform. And the idea is to be able to identify businesses who are growing within certain industries and to make sure that they have the ability to deliver value to their markets, to their customers. Do you just want to take us through who exactly the People's Fund is and what is your genesis and how long have you been around for?
Okay, so the People's Fund, we've always described ourselves as conduits to a people-led economy. Started off as crowdfunding in 2017, and then grew that into a model that can then fund purchase orders. And we started doing that in late 2018. And that's basically been now the primary focus of what the business does. So we call ourselves people who are trying to fix the country. And how we do that is by funding purchase orders for various people who have to fulfill various contracts to clients, and a lot of them are focused on things that do really help the country and the economy move forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in our country, and certainly through the challenges that we face, one needs to try and find different avenues or different solutions to be able to access funding. Now, purchase order funding is one of the classes of funding out there. It's probably one of the areas of funding that not too many people know about and how it works. And I think during this period, what we want to expose to our audience is the different types of funding options out there, so that if they did not necessarily know about purchase order funding, this is now an opportunity to learn a little bit about it. So would you mind explaining to us what purchase order financing entails?
Right. So purchase order funding sometimes is referred to as bridging finance. Sometimes it's referred to as tender finance. And essentially what it is, it's helping, giving somebody capital in order to be able to cover the expenses that they have in order to, fulfill whatever contract they have with the client. So just to explain it better with an example, you, for example, get a contract from ETTP to do a live webinar. And then you need to cover your expenses for your Wi-Fi. Maybe you need to buy the actual laptop that you'll be streaming on in order to successfully execute this. And maybe sometimes you might have staff on hand that you would need to pay, but you don't have the capital up front. And ETTP, they say, well, after the webinar has streamed and it was successful and you've delivered on the service that we require from you, we'll pay you, but we'll pay you probably after 30 days from the time that you invoice. Right? So this usually presents a cash flow conundrum for the business. So then what happens is you need capital not only to cover your expenses, but at least so that even if you were to use your money, you're not in a tight cash position for the next 30 days after you've invoiced. You come to the People's Fund, the People's Fund says, okay, cool. These are the expenses that we'll cover for you in order for you to be able to do that. And we'll charge you a certain fee. And our model is more of a profit share partnership type of model. So we'll charge you a percentage of what the client is going to pay you because we'll be collaborating with you on the project. And then once you're done, you invoice, the client pays, we take our portion with the money that we've given you, and then you take your remaining gross profits from that. So that's essentially what the model of purchase order funding is.
Okay, so you would need to have a valid contract or an invoice in place. Maybe if you wouldn't mind walking us through some of the requirements that one would need to provide.
Yes, so we call it purchase order funding, but it can be a service level agreement. It can be a contract. Basically, any valid documentation that you have from the client to say, we need X amount of items from you, or we need this particular service from you. And for that, this is what we're going to pay you. And this is the time frame in which you need to execute on that, right? So you need a valid purchase order is what we would say, but anything that is like that covers the scope. Generally, we like to do projects that fall into a 60-day time period. So that means from the time of execution up until the time that the client pays, we like that to happen within a 60-day time frame. So that kind of also speaks to the type of projects we can normally do. We obviously do consider projects, especially now, during this time, that might go a little bit over the 60-day period. And even before now, you know, one of the clients we fund projects for a lot is Eskom, and their projects usually span a little bit over the 60-day period. So we do consider that as well. Traditionally, you needed to require capital of under R1 million, but that's also been relaxed for the type of projects that we're doing now during this period. We still probably will after the coronavirus require that the business must be 51% Black owned, but that one is not a strict requirement as much anymore either. And again, even with things like margins, generally we prefer that there be a 20% profit margin on the project, but you know, on a case-by-case basis, the margins are considered. But if we absolutely cannot get the minimum 20% margin, it doesn't become financially viable for the entrepreneur anymore once we add our fees into the mix, and then we most likely wouldn't consider that project. But we try and see how we can work around certain things like that. And yeah, I think those are the high level requirements that I would say we would look at on the surface before we dive into, you know, the deeper things that we require in our due diligence.
Okay, that's great. I think so certainly it's as you said, a mechanism for short-term funding. 60 days is kind of the duration that you would look to do the lending for, and it certainly then does become a bridge, because I suppose you would have delivered on a certain contract, and you are now awaiting payment, and really what you are trying to do is to potentially ease the working capital challenges that a business may have in the period from concluding the work to the period of actually receiving the funding. So you would play that critical role in terms of overcoming the working capital challenge during that phase.
Yes. So we generally find that a lot of the businesses, obviously, as well, usually just don't have the capital upfront to be able to even begin executing on the project. So I think we do play an important role in at least helping a lot of people get started in the game. One of the questions that do come up and have come up quite a lot is, do you help startups or people that are delivering for the first time Initially, when we started, it wasn't a consideration, but because of the relationships that we've created with the clients that we, have accumulated over the period, there are certain businesses that if they are delivering for the first time to a particular client, we can look at it, but you do have to have some level of experience in purchase orders at the very least. So it is a great working capital solution, but also it's also for somebody who is trying to get into the space of purchase order funding, or at least grow rather. I think we've been able to help a lot of businesses in that regard.
Okay, that's great. I'd just like to take the opportunity to welcome some of our regular attendees to the discussion. So Funeka, Dorcas, Freedom, thanks very much for joining us this afternoon. I just want to encourage everyone to please use the chat function at the bottom of your screen. So please send us through your questions. I see there is a question now, Yolisa, which I'll get to. And just to remind everyone, please do follow us on social media at E to the Point on Twitter. Register for our newsletter on www.ettp.co.za so that we can bring you some of these great conversations during this difficult time, and to be able to find opportunities, whether it be to access funding, to understand the requirements, so that as entrepreneurs, we are better positioned to take advantage of these opportunities in the market. So Yolisa, I just wanted to ask a question that's come through from Sean. And Sean's question is, does the client need to sign off on the PO financing arrangement? So yes, the deliverer of the service may come to you and he's got a valid purchase order in place and he may have delivered the work already. To what extent do you now set up the arrangement between the service provider, let me call it the service provider in this case, and their client who they have delivered the service for, and then of course yourself as the funder? How do you sort of tie that loop, that three-party loop together to make sure that you are managing the risk? Because I think in the type of lending that you do, the level of risk could be quite high. So maybe take us through that arrangement and how that arrangement works.
So it would depend mostly on what the client's payment requirements or payment terms are. Traditionally, what we do is we require that we create an account that we all have access to. That would be one option. If you bank with a particular institution, we'll just become transactors on that. If not, you would have to change to that particular institution that we prefer. And then you would have to go back to your client's platform. So normally most people who are in government would have to go to CSD and update the CSD database with the new banking details. Some other clients, it's a matter of communicating with the client to say, I'm getting funding from these people, and please can you change my banking details on your system? In extreme cases, we might have to sign an agreement, but that would be on a very big contract. Like if we have to give you 20-something million, for example, then in that instance, we would require to sign an agreement with your client to say that they will pay us actually, as opposed to paying you first. And then we would extrapolate. And then we would, split the funds from that account in that manner. So it depends on, one, the size of the contract. Number two, what your client's payment requirements are. For most people, it's very easy for them to change it on CSD because there's a lot of the contracts that we do fund. And then the last option, the absolute last option, and it would go with the size of the contract, would be for us to get into a three-party agreement between you, us, and the client on how they would pay out the money.
And do you find sometimes that causes confusion? And maybe I want to articulate this from a risk perspective, because the supplier may have delivered the service, but now there is potentially risk of that supplier needing funding. And as the customer, would I necessarily have a positive view of the supplier in wanting to use the supplier going forward? So have you come across some of those challenges potentially, which happens traditionally sometimes in a very risky environment, and more particularly when you're funding small businesses? How do you guys manage that relationship?
So I think, first of all, because we focused on the 51% Black owned, that was one of our primary criteria. I think the clients are then understanding of the type of suppliers they have in that space generally. So you find that a lot of the times they tend to be very supportive, actually, of the mechanisms, because they do understand that some people will need funding, especially if the project is very big, right? So like I said, for a 20 million Rand contract, I think even the client would understand not every supplier has, that much cash just lying around during a time like this. So from that perspective, I think the clients are welcoming as they can be, to an extent where even with certain departments, we are now exploring getting into a certain MOU relationships where they can promote the services that we offer to their business. Because at the end of the day, one of their challenges is that the contracts are issued out to the entrepreneurs, but the entrepreneurs take long to deliver. And they are aware that a lot of the entrepreneurs don't have the funding. So if we're coming in to say we can support your entrepreneurs and help them deliver, then they can meet their objectives, and we can help their suppliers also meet, their commitments to them. Confusion maybe might be more on the entrepreneur side. Sometimes we find that there can be a little bit of resistance, even if it is communicated clearly what they need to do, because they might have, especially on CSD, they might have multiple projects with different clients. So if they're changing it now, they invoiced another client with a different account, and now we're asking for a new account. So sometimes there might be confusion in that regard. Sometimes some people don't understand why it is that you are giving them money and you want access to their accounts, which I also don't really understand why they don't understand it, but they don't. Sometimes people are just not comfortable with giving us access to their accounts, which is a bit tricky because it creates an element of distrust with us, because how can we trust you with our money if you can't trust us, to have access that we need? So I think the confusion usually lies on the actual people that we fund more than the clients themselves. The clients can be very welcoming. Clients who have complicated payment systems will communicate, and if we can find a work around it, we do. But if it cannot absolutely happen, then unfortunately, there's nothing we can do in that regard.
Yeah. I think it's interesting points you raise, because I think if the arrangement is clear and the client and the supplier are invested in the process, then actually it does mitigate the risk, because the funding is able to be paid across, the goods and services are able to be delivered, and that payment process and the working capital management process is then handled a lot more efficiently between all three parties. So I think certainly it's a great way to be able to close that loop. In terms of the risk associated here, because I think it's a great point that you raise around access to the bank account and the level of trust and transparency that one would need to exercise when taking on funding. And by in terms of that, I'm referring to all funding, because there's a level of accountability, and at the end of the day, you have to pay back the money, and there's certain obligations on your side. And it's certainly a great way to be able to establish that oversight, also to make sure that the money is going and is being spent in the right way and is going towards the correct expenses. Because I would imagine in the application process, you are going to set aside, what exactly you are going to be using the funding for. And that is sometimes a bit of a challenge, because sometimes the needs of the business change. And I suppose if that happens, they would need to communicate to you. So in terms of the monitoring and the oversight, it's an important aspect, I would imagine, of what you guys do in dispersing the funds. But maybe take us through that process in terms of the oversight from your side.
Right. So firstly, one of the risk mitigating things we do with regards to the money is we don't pay the entrepreneurs the money into their account. Under extreme circumstances with people that have labor, that's the only instance where we would have to look into if we can pay into their accounts. But generally, we pay their suppliers directly, right? So again, that kind of speaks to the kind of projects we generally do. There's a supplier who's selling this, and you are another supplier basically on top of that supplier. We pay them. That's the first level. The second level, obviously, is then the access to the account. The only transaction we do on their account is take our money when the client pays. Nothing else happens on their account. Then we also have a collections officer. And our collection officer actually plays a very important role in not only supporting the entrepreneur throughout the process and keeping them accountable, but also ensuring that, you know, there's communication back to us in terms of what is happening with the project. Are there any changes? Will there be delays? And so every stakeholder involved in the process is then kept well informed. And we even make it a requirement in the agreement that you are required to keep us updated. But obviously there's somebody who says, I'm here to support you, I'm here to help you. We found this to be a very important person during the lockdown and COVID-19 right now, because a lot of projects, especially imports, have been unfortunately adversely affected by certain restrictions. So if we didn't have that person, we wouldn't know, and we would have no way of keeping track, you know, of what is actually going on with these projects that were supposed to have paid even a month ago.
Okay, so so enter COVID-19. There's additional risk into an industry, and I guess an element of lending that is already perceived to be risky. You're funding small businesses. Enter the pandemic, and suddenly all the rules of the games change. The levels of risk change. Everything is probably perceived to be higher risk. And I know you alluded to some of these things very quickly when you chatted earlier, but maybe how did the current pandemic change the way in which you guys looked at some of your requirements and how you are evaluating applications for funding that are coming through this period? So if you could maybe just take us through how you guys have also adjusted to the increased levels of risk out there, and perhaps changed or amended certain elements of your process and your criteria during this phase.
So I think one of the first things I mentioned was on the amount of capital required. When we saw the type of projects that needed to be funded during this time, mostly masks and sanitizers, those are the more highly demanded things right now. Capping it at 1 million was no longer going to be sustainable, because then there's a large group of people who would not be fundable as a result. And I think I said in the beginning, we're trying to fix the country. So even during a pandemic, I think the responsibility is even greater now than it has ever been before. So we just thought about, with our philosophy, how much more can we do what we say we're doing, right? We're not necessarily obsessed with the certain requirements. There's a philosophy behind them, but ultimately it's about making sure that at the end of this pandemic, there's still a country for businesses that can be funded. And so how do we support the ones that are doing the work that is important? And that also then spoke to the BEE requirements element as well. We said, okay, for the pandemic and for people supplying essential services, what we'll do is we will overlook that requirement. So if your business is not 51% Black owned, you would still be able to qualify. And even on just certain other requirements, if an arrangement can be made, if something can be accommodated and we are comfortable with the level of risk, or we have an appetite for it. I mean, some of the things would be informed by, have we worked with you before? Do we have a working relationship with you? Do we have a working relationship with your clients? What are the things that we know we can do comfortably and things that we cannot do? So I cannot get into the details of those because it's a case-by-case thing. I don't want to say, oh, we'll overlook this, and then, you know, my team is bombarded with people saying, your boss said she'll overlook it, when it's really a case-by-case basis. But I think the two main things is the capital required is one of the things that we lessened, number one. Number two, it is the BEE requirement. And then another thing you mentioned was, how do we mitigate the risks also, or how do we still protect ourselves from certain things? So one of the things we also picked up because of the masks and the sanitizers is that there are a lot of scams out there. So if somebody were looking for funding for that specifically, would most likely prefer them to use a supplier that we've already used and trusted, and that relationship has gone well. But in terms of everything else in our due diligence process, we're still doing the same things that we've been doing. We're not like relaxing now and saying, okay, you know, you just want money for what you say is essential services, we'll just give it to you. We're still going to do all the checks that we normally used to do, and probably even be a bit more stricter now, because we're seeing a lot of opportunists and people trying to say they have valid orders that are not valid, or valid suppliers that are not valid. And, you know, with the lockdown, it would be difficult to implement some of our capital recoupment measures if we take those risks. So, yeah.
Absolutely. I think it becomes exceptionally important during this phase, especially where, as you said, you know, there are opportunists in the market, especially when it comes to the provision of some of the essential services. And I guess from your side, you've still kind of maintained your due diligence sort of process. In fact, you may have become even a bit more rigorous around it to be able to establish whether some of these transactions are legit and they are real. And I think more importantly, whether the people applying for funding can actually deliver on the service during this critical time. So I think that, you know, that's a very important element from your side as well. I just want to transition and maybe take a couple of questions, Yolisa, if you don't mind. So there was a question from let me have a look, Funeka, who is a regular. So Funeka wanted to find out, you know, what percentage range do you charge for the funding, or is it dependent on the contract or SLAs that are to be financed?
If you have a 30% margin on the project, we'll charge you 6% of your purchase order value. If your margin is less than that, then the fee would vary slightly from that, and that will be dependent on what your margin is. So 30% margin or higher is a 6%. Less than 30% margin depends on the margin that you have. In the instances of projects that we think there might be a higher risk, again, the fee might also be adjusted to accommodate what the risk might be. But generally, it's 6% of the purchase order value. Okay, great.
Yolisa, you spoke about the duration of the funding, 60 days. Are you finding that that is also one of the areas that you guys are flexible on during this time, the slightly longer payment periods?
Yes, we are. We are open to slightly longer payment periods. What we've also noticed, though, during this period is that orders are getting paid more quickly because a lot of them are more urgent orders. So the delays are mostly might be more on the execution side than on a client paying side, because clients need the things quite quickly. And I think that also informs why we've said, yes, we normally fund any type of project, but during this period, we want to actually strictly focus on those that are servicing essential services, because then even the suppliers can continue to operate if, you know, their services are related to that.
Sure, absolutely. I think just another question on the chat from Sean. What is the current size of your fund from a capacity perspective?
I want to give him a number genuinely, but it varies and it changes every day. What I will say is that to date, since we started in 2018, we've expended just over 50 million. We're gunning for 100 million by June, but we'll see how that goes, because that's obviously around the corner. But yeah, to give him a more clearer perspective on a time range, it's 50 million since November 2018.
Okay, cool. Thank you. And then tell me, in terms of the types of funding, so purchase order financing is the primary type of funding that the People's Fund do. Do you guys do other types of funding solutions as well?
At the moment, no. So with the crowdfunding now also feeds into crowdfunding to fund purchase orders. So the funding that we offer now is purely just purchase order funding and anything that can fall into the category of what I described earlier. Okay, great.
I see there's another question from Michelle that has just come through. So she asked, what is your minimum PO purchase order funding value that you guys would look at?
Okay, so we don't have a minimum. We would fund any amount. The only thing is that there's a minimum fee that we do charge. And what would make us not fund your particular purchase order is if that minimum fee proves to become more expensive than the money that you're actually going to get back from the client. Like if it's not financially viable, essentially, then we won't consider it. But there are people who have needed 6,000 Rand, and we funded that. And we're, I think, among the few in the market who actually do consider transactions that are under 250,000, because most people require 250,000 going. You need 250,000 going up. So we consider any amount. It just comes down to, do you have enough margin to be able to afford the fees that we charge?
Okay. In terms of the Yoliswa, just to reiterate some of the criteria that you spoke about earlier on, just maybe take us through that once again. So there was a question just to maybe clarify the requirements. So you said it was the actual purchase order, the contract that would be in place. You would then look at, I would imagine, some of the financial statements from the business. What other information would you look at?
So also just to clarify, not financial statements in the traditional sense, like in the finance world. We don't need your balance sheets. We just need your bank statements, which would be for 12 months, minimum 6. There is a whole list. I don't want to take up too much time going through it. It would be your supplier quotes. It would be your company documents. It would be your documents as the director or the representative who's applying, just from a vetting perspective. And like I said, if you are, we don't go too detailed into the bank details, but if you're not using a preferred financial institution's bank account, then we would probably require you to change that. But the top 3 things would be the supplier quotes, it would be the purchase order, it would be your bank statements, and proof of previous work if you've worked with the client before. And that would come in the form of previous purchase orders and invoices. And we use this as a mechanism to track what type of payment periods your client normally, uses as well, so that we can also manage our expectations. If you haven't worked with the clients, then there is a whole detailed thing on our website which will tell you what type of clients we'll consider if you're delivering to that client for the first time. And then, all the company documents, which would be your tax clearance. If you are BEE compliant, it would be that, your IDs as the directors, and your proof of residence, so like the FICA side of things as well. Okay, great, thank you. I know you don't like to refer to the People's Fund as a lender as such, yes. And I know that you started off by saying that you're doing it for the country. So what is the next step for the People's Fund? So you have a fund that you've been dispersing funds from, and obviously recycling funds as people are repaying. So what would be the next step for you guys? I think one of our biggest objectives would be to be able to offer funding at 0% and not charge anybody fees. Like I think I mentioned the element of partnership. So there are some various things we're exploring in that space on how can we develop. It will still be a fund in a sense, but we don't actually charge the entrepreneurs anything. But that's not a tomorrow conversation. It's a process in the making. But the things that are happening right now during the pandemic are opening up options for us to be able to explore that further. Okay, that's excellent. So Yolisa, I think if you wouldn't mind sharing your contact details for our audience as to how they are able to get a hold of you and your team and the People's Fund, if you wouldn't mind sharing that, and we'll also post it on the chat. What I'll do is I'll share, because I think most people are more interested in how to apply than they are my details. So I'll share the contact information of the actual applications team. So this screen right here, the first number, the cell phone number, is our WhatsApp number. It's our WhatsApp business line. So there's somebody available there that they can chat to and get more information about how to apply, what process to follow, and if they even want to follow up on the application. The second number is our office line. Obviously, you can't chat to that number, but you can also inquire there if that's what you prefer. And then you can also send an email to applications@thepeople.co.za if you want to find out more about the process. And then once you make the first point of contact, it becomes easier for us to then just pick up the conversation from there on.
Okay, great. Thank you, Yolisa, for that. I wanted to firstly thank you for your time this afternoon in sharing the information with us. Unfortunately, we were not able to get through all the questions in the chat, but we will certainly undertake to send you some of those questions so that you could respond directly. I think in a time where the country is going through a very difficult patch, there's a lot of work stoppages out there. People are looking for access to opportunities. They are looking for access to funding. What are some of the practical tips that you could share with us for entrepreneurs? Because you've been seeing a lot of entrepreneurs coming through to you during this phase for funding, and maybe more so now than kind of pre-COVID. What kind of practical tips and advice would you give to entrepreneurs out there who are looking to access funding and want to consider the People's Fund as a potential option?
I think the same rules from what I said even in the previous one still apply. A good level of preparedness is always very important. Understand and make it your responsibility as well to understand clearly what your funders require. I think is one of the most important things so that you can prepare on your side as well. It won't be acceptable to use the pandemic as a reason to not do the admin that you need to do in order to get things done. I know that sometimes the reason why people say, oh, I didn't send the invoice because of this reason. Yes, there are challenges and everybody is going through those challenges. But I think if you want to have a business that will outlast the current climate, you're going to need to work harder than what you're prepared to do, number one, but also it's mostly just be prepared. Be prepared, do the research, do the exercise of finding out if you come across issues. I mean, there's no system that is perfect, and we also probably are even learning new things about our business as we go along in this process. If you come across issues, communicate them and try to find a way to work with people. I think it's also remembering, I think now more than anything, the most important thing is to understand that, that's what I've seen, is you're working with people and people can be spoken to. So that's why I said on a case-by-case basis, there are certain considerations we've been able to make because there's people who are appealing to the human element as opposed to just saying, guys, I just need this transaction to get through the door. Secondly, build a relationship with your funders. I think that's another important thing that's not been said enough, that entrepreneurs don't do very often. Don't take for granted the services that any funding institution is giving you. Don't take loans. I know it might be hard, but don't take loans and go use them for personal things and not what it was, initially assigned for. Be responsible with your funds, plan properly, give people accurate information, give people a reason to trust you from the beginning, because I think it makes any other transaction thereafter easy. If you come into problems, communicate. I can't stress this enough as well. Communicate not only with us, but with your client as well. Because like I said, you understand you're dealing with people and people will be understanding that, yes, things happen. So I think that's like the most advice that I would give to somebody. Do the research, use those contact details to find out what it is that you need to prepare for the fund. Go through the website. If there's anything that's not clear, ask questions to the point where you feel like you cannot ask enough questions anymore. And again, if there's an issue, take it up with us and we'll see how best to support you. But the reality is we're not going to be able to fund every business in this space as well. So that's why I'm saying people must do their research, because there are things that we can do, but there are also things that we cannot do. And the research element, not just on the People's Fund, but on any funding options that are available, might save you a lot of time perspective as well, So I think there are a lot of funders who have said before that you find somebody who needs funding in a week will apply to an institution that will take 3 months. That's not being prepared, right? Yeah. So do your work, and I think it will make your life easy as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think thank you for the advice. And I think certainly, one of the learnings through this difficult time that we're going through is that, relationships remain key. Transparency is important. Communication is important. And those are elements that we certainly need to focus on during this period. From an entrepreneurship to the point perspective, I think that has been our objective through this platform, to inform, inspire, and equip entrepreneurs to be able to bring them relevant information, get them exposed to the relevant experts out there in the market who are in the know, and to try and close that gap as much as possible, and to make sure that we're getting the communication out there, we're getting the information out there as efficiently as possible. So please do remember to join us. And for those of you who know of people who are unable to join the conversation, please do refer them to our YouTube website. So this discussion will be recorded on our YouTube website for you to access. And once again, really would love to get your feedback on the sessions. Thank you to all of you who have joined the session today, our regulars, and I see some new guests as well. Thank you for your questions. And as I said, those questions that we couldn't get to, we will send them directly to Yolisa. So please do follow us at E to the Point on Twitter, Entrepreneurship to the Point, our website, ettp.co.za. And please do sign up to our newsletter to keep yourself informed of sessions that are coming up. On that note, I would like to draw your attention to the slide on your screen. Tomorrow we have a discussion with Nedbank, with Regina and Nirmala, who will be coming through to speak to us around some of the relief measures that Nedbank have implemented, as well as to take us through the process in terms of the South African Future Trust. So Nedbank are one of the administrators of the trust as well. So that'll be tomorrow morning, 10:30 a.m. So please diarize that. In the afternoon, we are going to be continuing with our In Conversation series, where we'll be chatting to David Leroux, who is one of the entrepreneurs on our Property Point program. And David will be coming through to speak to us about his business story, and also how he has been navigating the challenges of the COVID-19 period. Once again, Yolisa, thank you for your participation this afternoon, and for sharing your wonderful insights and wisdom. And hopefully we'll get you on the platform very soon. For those of you that have missed our song earlier on that we played in with, our resident DJ is quite proficient, and I'm going to ask him to play us out with that song. So I'm Desikan Chetty, and thank you for joining us on Entrepreneurship to the Point this afternoon.
Thank you very much for having me, and I hope we can work together to fix the country.
Hello, welcome to the Bad Boy World Champion PGA Tour. I'm your host for the day.
Okay.
Gumble. With this last birdie right here, Puffy Woods, winning champion from the 3-time champion, Fuzzy Badfeet. Are a little too tight, and he really has a wedgie.
He's unstoppable.
Who's hot, who not? Tell me who rock, who sell out in the stores. You tell me who flop, who cop the blue drop, who jewels drop pops, who mostly Gucci down to the blue drop. The same old pimp, mace, you know ain't nothing changed but my limp. Can't stop till I see my name on the blimp. Guarantee me and sales for the level up. You don't believe in Harlem World, nigga, double up. We don't play around, it's a bet, lay it down. Niggas didn't know me 91, bet they know me now. I'm the young Harlem nigga with the Goldie sound. Can't no P&D, niggas hold me down. Cooler, school me to the game, now I know my duty. Stay humble, stay low, blow like Woody. True pimp, niggas spin no dough on the booty. When you yell, there go Mace, there go your cutie.
They want from me, it's like the more money we
good. She have just won the Bad Boy Golf tournament. How do you feel about winning this PGA?
Oh man, well I was having some trouble on the 17th hole, but my man B out from up above came down, talked to me, told me to cool out. I did it.
I guess this mean more money, more problems for you.
Yeah, I guess so. More money, more problems.